It seems to me that we have a perfect collision between the first and second sessions we've had this morning, and that we're back in 1931 at the Austrian bank crash. And I'm wondering, in fact, whether the first session was talking about aberrant human behavior and that you've been talking about rational human behavior. And in that sense, I'm wondering whether algorithmic activity in the back room, in the back office of a big bank in which one absolutely epic mathematician comes up with a formula that nobody in the bank understands, complies with your optimism.
Well, I think there's a very important distinction that only dawned on me recently, and that's between asset markets and commercial markets. We use this word market for two different things. And I think it's now clear that we've had these bubbles and busts in asset markets since the South Sea bubble and the Mississippi Company in France and all that, and the tulips. It's been going on every sort of 10 years. We have another one, and we don't seem to be able to stop it. And there's a wonderful experiment, which is very similar to the kinds of things that Laurie and Dan do, by the father of experimental economics, Vernon Smith, who basically he put undergraduates in a room and he let them work out through trade. He gave them a sort of trading proposition, and they came up with very efficient solutions that gave everybody the best outcome if it was things for consumption, if it was hamburgers or haircuts where you got the thing and you consumed it. If, on the other hand, it was something that you were buying and selling in order to speculate on its future value, you always got these bubbles, and then you got these crashes. And I think that there's a fundamental distinction there about sort of optimism about the resale value of things. So, for example, the housing market is a market, it's a utility, it's a how do we house people, but it keeps getting turned into a casino.
Well, I'm wondering what you make of this, because at the end of the day, the thread in this morning's activity, in the end, was bank crash. The thing that Neil wanted us to do was to bail out the Spanish banks. That was his absolute fundamental building block towards a better tomorrow.
So first of all, I think that the issue is deeper than just bailing a bank. I mean, I think if we bail a bank and we keep the rules the same way, we're going to be in the same mess a few years down the road.
But none of you talked about regulation and regulation.
No, I think, for example, the understanding. Let's just kind of. I like the optimism, right? It's kind of nice to be optimistic, and there's lots of correct things about this optimism. But let's think about something else about irrationality. So, as a raise of hands, how many people here have eaten in the last week more than you think you should? Anybody? Okay. How many people in the last month have exercised less than you think you should? How many people here have ever texted while driving? Come on. How many people here have ever had unplanned, unprotected sex?
Long time ago.
Politicians.
Yeah, how far back?
Now, if you think about all of these problems, these are things that we don't just agree that we've done before. These are things that we all recognize we'll do again. And it tells you that we have this traumatic problem between short-term and long-term, right? And I think that left to the human spirit, long-term and short-term is going to be a tremendous problem for us. And technology is actually making it harder, right? So I'll be the counter-optimist. Look, the next version of the smartphone, is it going to be more tempting or less tempting to text while driving? It has to be more tempting, right? They want us to do it more. The next version of the donut 2.0, right? More tempting or less tempting? Has to be more tempting. If we let banking system evolve as they want, will they become more tempting or less tempting to get things to people to do things in the short term? So I think when we design the world around us, well, I certainly agree there's lots of things to be optimistic about. We also need to be cautious, because the bigger the world is, the more connected it is, the more is the case that we could do small things that could be incredibly devastating. And I think banking is one of those things that, because they are so widespread, we have to think much more carefully about how they fit with human skill in a very basic way. And to the extent they don't fit with human skill, we should regulate those aspects away.
So the fundamental is that we have to remember how near we are to the primate.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, one of the striking things in my primate head from hearing about the Euro crisis this morning was that I was just at a field site where I was watching monkeys from different groups interact and watching their kind of political battles over dealing with scarce resources.
Your hair is interacting with the microphone. Yeah.
This is the problem. If you get more women here, you're going to have these kinds of technological difficulties. The gentlemen aren't having these problems. So. But yeah, I mean, the battles between Germany and Greece, I can see in the battles between different troops of monkeys.
Well, can you therefore see their resolution?
Some of it. And I think the power of the resolution.
What happens?
Well, I don't know. I'm no economist, so I shouldn't speak.
No, but you are a behavioralist.
But yes, and I think one of the things that you've seen is getting people on the same page, thinking in terms of getting rid of the old nationalist distinctions is going to be really important. Monkeys create groups, and they create groups in ways that don't have labels like I'm a German or I'm a Greek. They don't have language, and that means they can't have different languages. And I think that humans both have the power to override those things. You can start talking about a centralized Europe, talking about people in the Europe zone as opposed to Germans and Greeks and so on.
Well, one of the interesting things I thought in your presentation was that you didn't distinguish between male and female monkeys. And we've already referred to the problems with your hair and the microphone. But there's a serious point here. That is that if you look at what's going on at the moment, it's essentially, not in banking, but certainly in politics, it's still essentially a male preserve. And it's a very male preserve, bar one woman, one rather key woman, in the Euro crisis. Is there a distinction between male and female when it comes to resolving these kind of problems?
I think it's a big and open question, but there are definitely researchers who make the claim that having males in politics is a dangerous business. So there's a primatologist, Richard Wrangham, who's written a book called Demonic Males. And his main claim is that if you look at the evolution of primates and you look at societies in which males are dominant, that comes along with warfare. So what are the only other species that engage in large-scale war? How many other species of the millions and millions of species out there? 2. Humans and our closest living relative, the chimpanzee. What do we have in common? Well, we both, at least historically, have had groups in which males have dominated and males have been really related, and males can set up coalitions. And this is the kind of thing you don't see in the monkey species we work with. It tends to be the females are very related. They're the ones who are setting up these coalitions. When you see males ganging up together to gain power, Wrangham argues it's very dangerous. And the fact is, if you look at human history, there might be a move to sort of making these genderized claims.
Well, it's a very interesting point because in this country there is a campaign on at the moment to get more women experts onto television. And I'm a news anchor, and we are constantly looking for women. So you ring up a woman and you say, we want to talk about the public sector borrowing deficit. And she will say, well, I am an economist and I certainly deal with it, but it's not really my subject. I think I won't do it, thanks very much. And you ring up the male counterpart and he says, public sector borrowing deficit, not really my subject, but I can certainly talk about it. What time do you want me?
There's actually a beautiful experiment that they ran at Stanford. And they took men and women, and they basically showed them some interesting math problems, and they saw at what frequency they can solve them, and so on. And everybody knew how good they were in that particular math problems. And then they asked them, what would you rather do? Would you rather get paid based on your work, $1 per question, or would you like to go into competition with 3 other people? And then if you're top, you would win $4 per question, but if you're not the top, you would get nothing. And then they looked at the quality of the skill and a function of how many of those people wanted to enter the competition. And you would expect that the people with low skill would not enter the competition, and the people who are good at it will enter the competition, right? These are people who should. And what they saw was that basically men just entered the competition regardless. Right? So they were slightly sensitive, like good men enter a bit more than the bad, and the women just didn't enter the competition at all. So the good women who should have gone to compete didn't compete, and the bad women who shouldn't compete, bad, I mean, not good in this particular version of math, didn't compete at all. But it looks like there's a big gender difference in our preferences for competition, which, of course, if you think about the system we're developing both in corporations and in government, is working against this tendency.
Matt.
Of course, this goes deeply back into the difference between males and females, right back, of course, to reproduction, because being a male is usually a high-risk, high-reward strategy. In other words, in terms of the number of offspring you can leave behind, whereas being a woman is a much more predictable, you're likely to be able to have kids, but not so many, whereas men, you either end up with none or hundreds. Back in the old days, I'm talking about, not today.
Well, I mean, one of the things I'm interested in is the fact that none of the three of you have asked the audience how many people in here are optimists. Okay, hands down, how many are pessimists? There's a lot of candor, or not very much candor. Who knows? What do you make of that?
I think he was just so good. I think if you asked the question after
dishonesty?
the first session, I think if you asked the question after the session...
You asked it after Neil's question, and after Neil's talk, and then after mine.
So it's all about environment, which is...
No, I think actually people interested in technology have to be optimistic, because I think technology is the tool to basically figure out what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right. So I very much... So look, standard
but
economics...
technology is the rational. It has to be. It's logical.
I don't think it interacts with rational minds, right?
Well,
Only
no,
if it's doing what it's meant to do. And I think one of the scary lessons is that it's often not. I mean, this is the kind of thing that Dan's finding, right? That the incentive structures we set up, we think are going to make people cheat less, but in fact, because they're dealing with these slightly irrational minds, ends up making people cheat more.
So yeah, so think about technology. If you think that everybody is perfectly rational, what should technology do? It should just present people with information. So think about New York City. New York City a couple of years ago decided to tell people how much calories are in each fast food on the menu in each fast food place in New York, right? Let's just provide people information, and people would know how to use that information and clearly would do better. What do you think happened with this experiment in New York City? Absolutely nothing. There's a couple of papers showing a slight decrease in calorie consumption and some showing slight increase in consumption. It was not about information. People basically, nobody went into McDonald's shocked that this was not a health food place. But if you think about it and you say, technology is not just about providing people with information. Technology is really about trying to understand what it is that we're doing badly and trying to fix those things that we don't do badly. It's kind of an augmentation of our brain in a way that would be productive. Google is coming up with Google Wallet. Right? So think about an electronic wallet. Is an electronic wallet going to be good for us or going to be bad for us? It could be either. It depends on how we build it. I'll give you one simple example. There's a concept called the pain of paying. Imagine you go to dinner and you pay either with cash or with credit card. Do they feel different? Of course they feel different. The cash feels much worse than the credit card. Imagine I owned a restaurant and I said, you know what, I figured out over a while that people...
I dispute that. I think actually when you pay with cash, you think, well, sod it, I've paid it, that's it. I'm not going to get visited by something down the line.
Okay.
The credit card, you're really not quite sure when it's going to come and how big it'll be when it gets there.
Well, you know how much the bill was, but so you can dispute it, but the evidence doesn't support your particular version of it. So let's talk about averages rather than individual. But let me just, so imagine I owned the restaurant and I said people eat on average 50 bites and pay $50. And Peter was here and I said, you know, you look such a nice person. I'll tell you what, I'll charge you half price, only 50 cents per bite. And not only that, I'll only charge you for the bites you eat. I'll serve you your meal, and every bite you take, I'll mark a little V on my notebook, and at the end of the meal, I'll charge you just for the bites you ate. How much fun will that meal be? I'll be incredibly miserable. Now think about it. This idea of that when things are disconnected from money, we have an easier time overspending, which is what credit cards do. If we design an electronic wallet, do we want to have that or not have that feature? Do we want people to feel the pain of paying and therefore be more stringent with the money, or do we want them to feel less pain of paying and therefore waste more? It's our choice in terms of how we want to design the technology and what aspects exactly of human psychology do we want it to fit.
Laurie.
No, I was just going to say this question about whether technology is helpful or hurtful is funny because we only have this question, I think, when we're dealing with our own psychological limitations, right? We use technology to fix our physical limitations all the time, right? I flew here from New York. I didn't swim across the Atlantic, right? I'm wearing contact lenses, as many of you wearing glasses and so on. We're so fine to use technology to fix our physical limitations, but when someone like Dan says, you know, if you have this Google Wallet, you're going to mess up, and it's going to mess you up in X, Y, and Z ways, we want to say, oh, no, that's not the case. And so I think what we really need is just sort of a paradigm shift in the way we think about rationality.
I'd like to dispute that again, because I'd like to go back to his axe and the mouse, right? The axe was shaped in exactly the way he wanted that axe to fit his hand. The mouse was fixed to fix, well, a general hand, but it wasn't my hand. And there's a big difference there. In technology, even Google technology, they may do lots of research and audience research and the rest of it, but in the end it's inflicted. I know it's not enforced on you, but it's what's available and you take it.
But it's easier and easier to customize technology these days because of the long tail and you know, so for example, to customize your reading list or whatever.
Have you got a customized mouse?
I haven't got a mouse anymore because I've got you know, one of these laptop-y things. But,
yeah.
But you're right, I haven't got a customized mouse. Just on whether technologies can be good or bad, I mean, of course, you know, some technologies can be used for evil things, and some lend themselves to it. I mean, I think it's an unwritten part of the story of the 20th century, or it's partly written, that radio played a huge role in the rise of dictators. If you go back and look at what Hitler concentrated on, it was radio. What did Oswald Mosley want from Hitler when he sent his wife to see her? It was money for a radio station.
Slight problem, Churchill won the war on radio.
Well, exactly. So, but then again, I mean, I got a virus on my computer a few years ago, and my wife said, what you do, calm down, is you go on the web and you find this website where they tell you how to solve it. And on this website were up-to-date updates from people about how to get around the latest versions of the virus. The virus designers can't do that. They can't have an open wall in which they're saying, and by the way, we just thought of another way of making the virus more evil, because we then learn on it. So there is a tendency for the bad guys can't use the open source system as much as the good guys. Sure, they can use it, but not as effectively.
We've got 3 or 4 minutes left, and it seems to me that Neil Ferguson established a very good start for this whole Zeitgeist, and that was to actually recommend several ways in which we could get out of what it is that is bugging us at the moment. So what's bugging us is what bugged us this morning, which was set out very coherently. So let's have from optimism, from primates, and from behavioral activity, let's have your cures.
Cut trade barriers. Get everybody exchanging all around the world as much as you can. Sure, that's not tomorrow's problem, and I'll bow to Neil on the immediate problem, but in the long run, that's what's going to do the most good.
Laurie.
Similar, get rid of groups. Get rid of groupism. The most painful thing I see in primates is how living in one group and not liking the other, being in
Google Plus a group?
I think Google Plus does a lot of things, right? We're all members of Google Plus as opposed to our particular nationalities. But you can see these things creeping in even here. Like I was impressed to see, oh, we have this nice name tag that says what company we're from and also our nationality. It's emblazoned in color, the only color thing on our name tag, right? We like this stuff so much, and if we could find a way to harness our human power to get out of that, we'd be better off.
So I believe in capitalism in a sense that, you know, you could produce fantastic mouses, and over time people could get all kinds of things that in the market could tell you what products are right and wrong. But as Laurie said, I think there's an amazing gap between what we can do in the physical world and what we learn and what we do in the mental world. And the cycle of learning in the physical world is much faster. You design a car, it doesn't go very well, you learn about it. You design a laptop, the keyboard doesn't work, you learn it. You design a financial system that it's not that good. It takes a while to learn how it works. And then after a while, when it fails, you're in real trouble, and it's really hard to figure it out. And for me, the biggest lesson in behavioral economics has been humility. You know, we have lots of ideas about what works and what doesn't work and how the world works. And I think we need to have a little bit of our humility and says, we just don't know. And if we don't know, it means we need to do experiments. I think in Rome, when people came victorious into the winners of all kinds of battles, they would have a parade for them, but they also had a slave that would whisper in their ear, memento mori, basically remind them, you're a human, every few minutes. And if I were in charge of any system, I would say data wins. What would be an experiment that we could decide? You know, Greece is a small country. Maybe we can experiment with them. Is there a way to try to figure out empirically what works and what doesn't work before we create this incredible system that has a substantial chance of failing?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank on your behalf Dan Ariely, Laurie Santos, and Matt Ridley.